Hey, this is Gary from 3Bug Media, and today we're going to talk about subdomains versus subfolders, what they are, how they're used, and which one is best for your use case. But before we start, let's go over what the differences are between the two. Let's start off with subdomain. Now I'm going to use a blog as an example because that's a common reason why you might want to add a subdomain to your website. So it would look something like this: blog.yoursite.com. Now in the eyes of the search engines, these are considered different websites, a different website than your current website. So they're two separate websites. You have your main site and now you have a subdomain, blog.yoursite.com, two separate websites in the eyes of the search engines. The nice thing with a subdomain is you can easily add on third-party services even if they're not compatible with the programming language of your main site. So say you have a WordPress site and you wanted to add, say, e-commerce, and you're going to use Shopify. They're not compatible programming languages, but you can easily add on a store to your website by using a subdomain. So you can add external and third-party properties and software to your website without having the headaches of trying to integrate them into your main site. It's really easy to use. It uses something called a CNAME record in your DNS, which kind of manages your domain, and all you really need to do is just add a CNAME record in your DNS and you can create a new subdomain almost instantaneously as part of your domain. Examples, like I said, would be Shopify if you're adding e-commerce. You want to add a WordPress blog to a non-WordPress website you're using now, or you're using something like landing page software that's not compatible with your current programming language on your website. So the big difference here is a subdomain is considered a totally different website than your main website. Now, when we're talking about subfolders, it's going to look something like this: yoursite.com/blog. You see here, blog.yoursite.com. There's a difference in the URL structure. In the subfolder case, the search engines consider everything after the .com to be part of your main domain, and that's the biggest difference between a subdomain and a subfolder, where a subfolder is all part of your main website domain. So it's part of your main domain, and typically it's going to use the same CMS, content management system, as your current domain because it's all going to be baked in together, so they need to generally work and play together well. Some third-party services, you can add a subfolder to your website instead of using a subdomain. Most of the time it's going to be WordPress through a plugin. Lead Pages is landing page software. That's an example where they have a plugin for WordPress where you can add external lead page landing pages to your website and still use them as a subfolder because they have a specific integration with WordPress to be able to create that structure. In most cases, especially if you're not using WordPress, you would probably have to use a subdomain instead of a subfolder. Okay, so the question is, which one do you use? And the answer is, it really depends on why you want to do this in the first place. So example number one would be SEO. So from an SEO aspect, subfolder is definitely the better way to go. It's every page that you create when you're using a subfolder is all part of your main domain. It all contributes to the same domain, and it all helps to increase the domain authority in the eyes of the search engine for that single domain. So everything's going into one web property that you're trying to build up. So from an SEO perspective, subfolder is usually the route you want to go if SEO is on your mind. So if you were adding a blog and you had the choice between the two, I would always say use a subfolder when you can, because all of that blog content you're going to create is going to contribute to your main domain and help increase your exposure and authority for that domain, instead of adding a subdomain where you basically have a second website that you need to build up and now you're managing and trying to do SEO for two separate web properties. Third-party apps. So if you have third-party apps, a lot of times subdomain is easier to integrate into your content management system, your existing website language. Pretty much any third-party app you can add as a subdomain, but very few you can actually add as a subfolder. So probably a popular example would be you have a WordPress site and you want to do e-commerce and you decide to use Shopify. They're not compatible programming languages and platforms, but you can easily add on a subdomain Shopify site to your WordPress site very easily. If you're going to blog, like I said, subfolder when possible. Landing pages. It really depends on what you're going to use a landing page for. So if you're using a landing page only for like AdWords or Facebook ads, and it's probably going to come down in a couple weeks or in a couple months, or you're going to keep making changes to it, and really it's not going to be a long-term page on your website. It's for like a very specific campaign that you're running and you're going to use advertising, then subdomains are perfectly fine to use because you're not really worried about the long-term SEO for these pages and how they're going to help build your website, because very likely it might come down anyway later on. But if you're creating landing pages that you think are going to be there for the long term and you don't plan on taking them down, then use a subfolder when you can, because it can help contribute to your SEO and your overall domain authority for your website. So landing pages, it depends on the longevity of that landing page and if it's going to stay on your site for the long term and if you want to use it for SEO purposes. Another example would be international pages. So if you have a business where you're dealing with multiple countries, then you may have an option where you're going to use a subfolder or a subdomain. Subdomain would be really if it's very substantial, the site. So say you're targeting France and you need a website entirely in French and you need French currency and you need everything French, then you're probably going to use a subdomain. If it's really just one or two pages in French, then you can probably do a subfolder, but it really depends on how substantially different all of these different countries that you're targeting are and how many changes you need to make to your website to accommodate these different countries. And that will determine if you use a subdomain or a subfolder. So hopefully this explains the difference between a subdomain, separate website, subfolder, part of your main website, and depending on what you want to use it for, which method you should go with. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to 3bugmedia.com. Thank you very much and have a good day.